Okay, welcome to episode 150 of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm delighted to be speaking to Dr. Amy Albright. Dr. Albright is an expert and trailblazer in human potential, bridging business strategy, neuroscience, health, and spirituality by integrating cognitive, emotional, physical, and spiritual intelligence. She brings a revolutionary approach to human evolution. The power of Dr. Amy's work has helped countless individuals and businesses achieve massive success while operating in greater alignment with their core values. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Over the weekend, I was listening to quite a few of your podcasts uh, over the last few weeks, really, and I was thinking, no, this is going to be a great conversation today. So thank you for agreeing to come and speak to me today.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah.
Mm.
So,
So, how I'd love to begin the podcast, and how I often begin, is for you to share a little bit of your own journey. How did you get into the work you now do?
mm. I would say that a lot of the work that I have made myself expert in came from early childhood imprints of not feeling safe,
Mhm.
having to survey my surroundings and understand what was going on in an attempt to predict the unpredictable behavior of some of the adults. I had some awesome adults in my life as well, but some of them were very unpredictable and very dangerous. And so I would say that I came to this work not from a place of everything was so easeful in my life. I had my share of trauma and my share of that unsafety feeling, and also a huge amount of health issues that created a real biological feeling of unsafety as well, along with health trauma in the medical system, right? So it's a little bit of the story of the underdog making her way through is a lot of it, and my understanding at a depth what it is like to walk through difficult waters and what it is like to not give up. And I'm just, you know, I could not be more passionate or more aligned with the work that I do, the messages that I teach. They come from such a deep place inside of my heart. And I have integrated as deeply as I can what it is that I am teaching. And I'm constantly furthering my own revelation inside of the framework and the strategies and the insights and the some of the references that I utilize are timeless and some of them are absolutely cutting edge, right? Everything from ancient philosophies and methodologies to the most advanced neurosciences applied in a laboratory that I have here at the retreat center. So the diversity of my career path and my life path and how I got here exactly are something that I tend to marvel at pretty regularly.
Yeah, wow. And I love what you say about the journey you've been on, the underdog and coming through. And I guess it reminds me a bit of that idea of I pull upon this quite a bit. Robert Bly's kind of in Iron John, he says the wound is where our greatest gift is to give back to society. And I've really felt that in my own life. I spent a number of years in a Buddhist monastery in my 20s, and when I came out, I had no idea what to do. And I put into Google, what's Piers meant to do with his life? And now it's quite obvious what I am doing with my life. And it's come through the wound of me exploring the wound and then going, okay, this is my path.
Mhm.
And it sounds like for you, that underdog, you really on purpose now, which is beautiful to see.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I similarly, I started on this path a long time ago. You're describing in your 20s being at that monastery. I'm sure there was something before even that. I
Mm.
had a really massive spiritual awakening experience at 18 when I was an atheist. So I was at
Mm. Mm.
university studying the brain,
Okay.
and was a devout atheist. Science was my God, and I had an experience. It was actually on an acupuncture table, which is not why I
Wow.
became a doctor of Chinese medicine.
Mm.
People might try to connect that dot, but that's not exactly how the story went. But it was a God moment. I don't know how to explain it. It was
Mhm.
as powerful, not as not as incredibly special as holding my son for the first time, but of that scale, right? Like it was a really powerful moment, and it helped me to navigate the rest of my life in a way that has integrated deep science, not just pop science. There's a lot of pseudoscience that's being thrown around out there in the world, but deep science with academic rigor and real-time testing and along with the anthropological and deep sacred understanding of what it is to be human.
Mm,
And those two things are not in conflict. They are actually
mm,
all the same. And what I came to understand from literally that moment when I was 18 years old onward is that science is here to serve the sacred,
mm,
to
mm,
help us to begin to interpret what it is that reality is, or why we are here, or how do we make the best of it? You know, how do we make an amazing life? How do we find freedom? We can look to science for that, but ultimately, if we try to reduce it to what science has measured, then we are reducing the all that is and the infinite possibility into a very myopic lens that has been
mm.
created by people, which means that it's fallible and limited inside of the vastness of the all that is.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. As I shared about my wife who passed last year, she had a near death in her 30s.
Mm.
And when she came back, she went on this amazing journey. And when she came back, she couldn't remember anything, but she was told that she would be shown the way in that teachings would come to her. And she really got into science in a big way. And especially the teachings of Nassim Haramein, the unified field theory. And she was like, yep, I've seen this before. Yep, I've seen that before. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, so I really see that the importance of science. I'm fascinated by science as well, more the psychology and, human development. And I see how important it is, but we can also get lost and stuck.
Yeah, ultimately, we're working inside of frames that were given to us by either perhaps the church many years ago or science. And those two things have, in my estimation, always interacted with each other. Like there was a point where the church said, if you believe in gravity, then you're a heretic,
Mm,
right? But
mm,
gravity then was at some point adopted as real because
mm.
before everything had to be described by only coming from God. Right.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a sacred point of view, but more of a fear-based, in my opinion, kind of point of view, right? There was a point in our evolution that
Mm,
that was the bias. But now what we've done is we've gotten stuck inside of Newtonian physics
mm,
and Darwinism, separatism, and competition and survival of the fittest. And although all of those players have had an integral role and we shouldn't necessarily discredit or move away from them, we haven't really looked at the unified field. We haven't really integrated what it is that Albert Einstein created in
mm,
his perspective, which is something that is about all of us being interconnected and about
mm,
finding truth inside of chaos, essentially, right? There's so much
mm,
to his work. But I think that it's important to just note that we have been stuck inside of separatism, meaning you and I are different from each other and separate, and also separate from nature, separate from, you know, and that leads to a lot of problems. And also that we're measuring things inside of a materialistic point of view. We can only, the things that are real can be measured or touched, and
mm.
everything else is not real.
Yeah.
Right? If you think about that as a perspective, we know that we're constantly exploring, and yet we have this invisible belief structure out in society that says only the things that we know and can measure are real,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And it's both are happening at the same time.
mm.
And that bakes into our reality to make us quite, I would say, arrogant to believe that we know.
Yeah. 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 It reminds me of a story of the Buddha. He would buy a forest and he went over to the monks who were asking him about knowledge and he picked up a handful of leaves. He says, I know all the information in all the leaves of all the trees, but I only choose to teach you these handful of leaves because it's too much, or something along those lines. And I see that, yeah, we've somehow got lost over the last period of time. But like you said about Newtonian physics, I remember the story of Giordano Bruno. I think it's 15th or 16th century. He was burnt at the stake for saying that the sun revolved, that the earth revolved around the sun. And now we all
Absolutely.
knew that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how we approach spirituality, how we approach the non-physical world, the feeling that we are not alone, the feeling that we are interconnected, this kind of stuff tends to veer people right off this page into like what they think is woo.
Mhm.
And I would like to postulate is actually scientifically backed. It's just that that stuff isn't what is popularized,
Yes.
right? And it hasn't been explored deeply enough. But I can tell you too, this, so some of this I began to understand when, after I was 18, when I was 18, after I had that experience, I began studying indigenous ways of sense making and living and understanding what sacred is and shamanism and rites of passage and like all of this study academically. And I would say that if we carry that through, those again, the scientific and that deeper understanding are not an argument of each other. But I would say that what we're what we're really working with is our ability to remember at a deeper level. And we have to be able to do that as empowered beings, as individuals, and as a collective inside of a time where great world architectures and infrastructures are falling. It's important to be able to move ourselves into the what is next, but not to do so with more fighting or more duality. I'm right, they're wrong, but rather a coming into truth and a coming into wisdom. And I do think that we're at an evolutionary point, not a, I don't think that evolution is devolving itself, right? And so how are we moving ourselves forward and how do we do that with more confidence and ease? How do we bring forward what it is that our ancestors knew about connectedness, about animism, that everything is alive, has its own heartbeat to it in a way, even if it doesn't have a heartbeat. And how do we bring all of that forward now at this time so that we can make it through? It's a bit of a threading of a needle, right?
Mhm.
And how do we make it through, not just as a collective, but as individuals who are doing whatever they're doing, running a business, having kids to raise, figuring out how to be a good family member and community leader or member. It seems like a huge task, but when we come from the right perspective, when we're not caught inside of the illusions that we've been either handed or kind of inherent in our own biology, then it's actually much easier to be able to navigate, right? There's a reframe that we can have perspective on. And I think that that realization comes when we recognize that this is the space that we're in, and we have enough biological safety and enough spaciousness to be able to find our way with it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'd love for us to kind of segue into safety and just say there that that's what I see about this time. It's like vision is like to keep holding that vision. Yes, it seems chaotic, but it's going to transform. My wife used to always say to me, it's like next few years are going to seem chaotic on the surface, but it's really positive. Like you said, we're not devolving. I 100% agree. I think often, through my research into our leaders and, Rupert Murdoch, for example, went to boarding school. He had a horrific time. You realize so many of the people in the media who are filtering, it's not trauma informed. So we're receiving this fear, but the reality is actually, I think there was a study by Harvard a few years ago saying this is the most peaceful time on earth.
That's wild, right?
Yeah.
In a world where media knows that fear sells, the way that they've learned how to do it, fear sells more than the positive, more than the hope, more
Mm,
than the bigger, deeper explanations and the frame setting. It's easy
mm,
to get people whipped up and make those quick dollars or get those eyeballs onto whatever it is that they're talking about. But I love it when we look at that kind of that underneath of the underneath and look at
mm,
those longer trends. I feel like that can save us from so much suffering, and really help us to frame and strategically make our way through whatever it
mm,
is, whether we're talking about, something in our personal lives or something in our business, but certainly something at a societal level. It's very
mm.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 100%. So I'd love for us to go into this idea of safety. I've listened, like I said, to a few of your podcasts, and you've said about the importance of that. And while I was listening, I'm like, that's one of the key issues that many of my audience have because of that early separation from their parents to be put into institutions or through childhood trauma, is that lack of safety. Then when
Hmm.
we go into a position of leadership and we don't feel safe, I've interviewed people who've said they'll these CEOs often run their companies like their childhood. So if there was no safety, it will be a dog eat dog. It won't be a safe place. So I'd love for you to talk a bit about the importance of safety.
Hmm. Yeah, this is key. Safety is the absolute biological, emotional, energetic, societal foundation, right? We are mammals and we are working as mammals, even though we're very smart and like to forget that we are essentially that.
Mhm.
So, welcome to the human experience where our biology won't lie to us. We cannot think to ourselves, I'm fine, I'm safe, I don't know what you're talking about, and actually be safe. I
Mhm.
can't tell you how many people that I've helped them to come to the realization, especially men who seem to take personal offense at the idea that they don't feel safe. And
Mhm.
I'm not referring to the tough guy could make your way out of a brawl, you know, mind over matter version of safety. I'm actually speaking to the neurobiological and energetics of safety, right? How we can function in the world at a deep level that can be measured and understood. We're either in a place of safety in that way or we're not.
Mhm.
And I would say that the majority of people that I've run into have issues with safety. It's actually very rare to not. And I would actually describe safety not as a finite goal, but as a continuum, because the
Mhm.
more that we build, the more safety we have to have so that we can hold, like the bottom floor of a multi-floor building, multi-story building, we have to have the right amount of foundation and strength to shore up what's happening. So if let's say, as we're to make the analogy, as we're building our lives, maybe we have a two-story building by the time we've graduated from boarding school or wherever we're at. And then we've got a four-story building by the time we're in our 30s or 40s with what we're holding with career or family or whatever we're doing in our lives. If we're working with an improper footing, and now we have
Mhm.
a four-story building, it can feel very, very tumultuous, very stressed, very able to topple, right? And that toppling, this feeling of safety and security is really a lot of things. And you pointed out this. It's the feeling of knowing where you belong. So I
Mhm.
would say that in the cases that I've seen with boarding school or kids who were adopted, even at birth, often there's a feeling that they have of not being placed correctly in society. They don't have their full maturation in their home environment, and they're not prepared on a neurological level, on an emotional level, to be able to be away from their parents. And what happens in that regard is a feeling of impending death. So the amount of emotional charge that that can create is not just, I don't know who am I feel a little insecure, but rather, I don't know if I will survive. And
Wow.
that is significant as an imprint to overcome.
Feeling of impending death. Wow, that's That's a strong one. And
Yeah,
yeah, I can certainly relate. I mean, one of the things that came to me in the last decade or so was as a child, I felt in fear all my time at boarding school.
that's right.
And I hear this so much from others who share their stories. It's like this same thing, this fear, this lack of safety, but this, always that amygdala, the limbic system's always on,
Hmm.
and there's no safety.
There's no there it unless a boarding school were to do it in a way that I've never heard of. What they'll end up doing is just putting in structure and pretend that that is love and safety.
Mm,
So you sleep in this room and you do this thing and you come to this, and we all dine like this and whatever all of the structures are. And that, perhaps is better than not having structure for a developing child for sure. But what they don't have is the real sense of who's here for you and who
mm,
will advocate for you in a primal way, in a way that a
mm,
parent might or should, at least if it's a healthy parent environment, right? These
mm.
traumas can also happen in extremely unsafe home environments as well. It doesn't require
Cool.
boarding school, but I would say that we know that we are a bit helpless
Mm,
as a child. We just know that. It's a part of the frame that's there. And it doesn't require anybody ever having said that to us. We just know that we depend on the adults around us. But even as an adult, like let's take our society back 200 years or something, when we lived close to the land, when we didn't have modern conveniences and the ability to heat our homes. And if we didn't have our placement in society correct, if we became banished, it was likely a pretty immediate death sentence.
mm,
We didn't make
mm.
it without each other, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why from the beginnings of time of hominids, we had clans. We had,
Mm,
these small tribal connections. I mean, not entirely. I also think that it's built on love and bonding. But on a
yeah.
very practical level, if we didn't have that, we were left to die. And certainly a child without real advocates, without real bonding, without somebody to cuddle up to or to know that they genuinely love you and see you, then we all stand the risk of that, regardless of whether that's because of a boarding school or however that happens for folks. And that is
Mm,
extremely difficult to overcome on a
mm,
neurological level, on an emotional level. The imprint of lack of safety is so powerful that it's a thread that runs through someone's life until hopefully they can get down to the bottom of it. But it's not gotten to the bottom of by the level of the mind. There is no empire. I have seen billionaires, they are still afraid. I have
yes.
seen, it doesn't matter. The people still have this fear inside of them until they handle it.
Mm, thank you. And it's interesting that if we think of the or the child's brain, it's not fully developed till it's 25.
Hmm.
So okay, the body might be developed by 14, 16, but the brain isn't. And therefore
Yeah,
it still needs that safety. And I often see this certainly in the UK when children, young men and women go off to university, to college at 18. A lot of them really struggle, you know.
absolutely. Yeah, they're not necessarily developed. And especially right now with what we're doing to kids by putting devices in their hands through educational years and also just for recreation, like their personal smartphone. But we're putting kids in front of screens, and that's actually creating developmental delays.
Mhm.
There's a lot of science that's coming out about the damages that are happening there. So essentially, if we don't have a developed enough brain, especially in that prefrontal cortex, then we know that we are not fit for survival.
Mhm.
And here we are, we're supposed to move, however far from our family, all of our friends, and, act like we're a full-fledged adult, and we're not. It's just not
Mm,
it's not there. And I don't know, I mean, even girls do develop their brains a little bit faster
mm,
than boys. But I don't know anybody that's like really in college age that that's off at university that's feeling 100% adept. They may be able to go through the motions of it, but they have a feeling of overwhelm, right?
yeah.
Either the academic pressure or the feeling of um, that there's going to do something wrong. They're going to misstep. Somehow they won't know how to pay a bill or show up at the right place or
Mm,
whatever. So I'm sure there's those extremely rare anomalies, but I do think that that is the majority, not the that's the norm. Is that, it's a huge amount of pressure. I think it can also be a huge amount of fun for some of the kids, but um, I think that we have to look at the pressure because a lot of the
mm,
times what we're looking at for fun in that age range is oh, go out and have some beers and whatever.
mm,
But some of that is, youthful exploration and adventure. And some of it might be the escapism from the pain that they're having from separation, from clan, from family, the feeling of
mm,
overwhelm. And so how much of it
mm,
is regulating a stress that they don't know how to regulate without substance, without alcohol. It's
mm.
hard to know.
Which is so interesting if we think that 18-year-olds really struggle with that, the the age, not the average age anymore, but it used to be 7 and 8 that children would be sent to these institutions in
Mm.
this country. And what's changed recently is it's more moved up to 11, 13. But even to me, that's still too young. I mean, I went age 11. Boris Johnson went age 11. Richard Branson went age 7. David Cameron went age 7. Elon Musk, although he didn't board, I don't believe he went, I believe, to a public school age 11. He was thrown down the stairs and hospitalized for 2 weeks.
Wow.
You realize these things happen to these leaders and they're just children.
That's right.
They're
And it
not
doesn't
safe.
matter. I want to really like come in here and emphasize. I've heard a lot of quite intelligent men speak as though that men or boys should be treated differently, like tough it up and oh
Mhm,
well. And if anything, they need actually, in some ways, more compassion and more time because their
mhm.
brain isn't as developed as the girls even. And
Yeah.
if we teach suppression of emotion and if we teach tough it up, and then we have a problem with the way that that gets acted out later,
Hmm.
like with anger or aggression or lack of compassion. Some of
Hmm.
those leaders that you were describing, I would say, have a lack of compassion. They don't
Yeah.
know how to connect. And
No.
and then we wonder why and go back to all of that. It's
Mm,
if it becomes too painful to connect, then it's easier to disconnect. And some of this can be neurologically wired in, with a certain amount of mirror neurons or kind of biology that someone's
mm,
inherited. But it's always nature and nurture, right? Like what's
mm.
happening in this environment, because we can have that same child express themselves differently throughout the course of their life. And I would, I understand that men have a rougher nature. Like I never, as a girl, had the desire to roughhouse or, like box with anybody in the backyard or, I just didn't have a fascination to that. And I know a lot of that is normal and it's actually necessary. There's a prefrontal development that happens for boys with rough and tumble
Mm.
play and things like that. That's really important. But I would say it's a different thing to shut boys down emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love for us to explore this because a lot of my work with leaders nowadays, and as I look more at the modern leadership books and teachings which is coming out of the US, it's less in the UK, is this importance of emotional intelligence, of compassion, of EQ. And I'm seeing that if we have learned to dismiss or dissociate from our emotions, I think Daniel Goleman talks about this idea of the high IQ person. They're very dissociated, they have lack of empathy, whereas the high EQ leader or person is very different, very heart-centered. And as I learn more about leadership, is that I think it's Cousins and Posner who say leadership is a relationship. So if
It
you've
is.
learned that emotions, you suppress your emotions, then you think, Oh, and then there's that breaking of attachment that relationships aren't important. It's like, no, you can't be a leader if you can't have relationships.
Yeah, not the sort of leader that is resilient and that builds something that lasts, right? That contributes. So I love this topic so much. And again, we can be inside of the falsehood of what we think with our mind, but ultimately, it is a relational role. And that doesn't mean that we have to be squishy and not look at what our numbers are and not be really, really super smart as business people. It's actually an invitation for more intelligence. So we see it in our laboratory here because we study people's brains. We look at an EEG and understand how they're functioning. And a lot of the leaders who are very high IQ and high drive are wasting about 30% of their neurological capacity.
Wow.
Yeah. I would say a very high percentage of people who are in a CEO or a startup situation or role, um, people who are pushing really hard, they think that they're being productive, and in many ways they are. But if you think about wasting 30% of your power, neurological power, the energy firing between the neurons and the other cells of the brain, it's a vastly wasted resource. And
Yeah.
so a lot of what we're doing is helping people to come into themselves with a strategy and a frame where they feel safe enough to have emotion and safe
Mhm.
enough to bond with people, that that's not a waste of time, that that's not a weakness. Because I mean, even in just adjusting how their brain is working with real-time neurosciences, applied neurosciences of neurofeedback therapy, we watch this shift begin to happen, but we can strategically amplify the shift and bring people into a place where it's not so black and white. Either you make money or you don't. It's either a dog eat dog. You got either you win or you lose in life. You're either successful or you're nice. Those things don't go together, right? It's an incorrect frame, but it's the frame that we've been indoctrinated into. And I would say that the underdog typically can end up in that role. Well, it's either that or they end up in a role where they're not in a leadership role. But underdogs who end up in leadership roles usually have suppressed a massive amount of themselves and are wasting a huge amount of neurological power to try to push instead of allow and follow what is there. And so they end up creating not only a life of dis-ease within themselves and an inherent limitation, even if they look quite successful, but they also are missing out on the true fulfillment of life. They're literally never going to be happy because as
Wow.
soon as they get a win, they're on to the next one.
Yeah. It's almost like Tal Ben-Shahar's idea of the rat racer, that we're always on to the next thing and then always on to the next thing.
And we
We
can
never
see
en
that.
we never
Yeah.
enjoy the journey.
That's right. We can see that in people's brains. We can see the people who have, I'll say, proper neurological balance, who, if I were to say that differently, are emotionally balanced and living really healthy lives. They have the reward circuits of their brain working correctly. They have
Mm,
their mirror neuron circuits open. They have
mm,
their executive function functioning, right? Which is a prefrontal cortex. It doesn't mean that you have to be an executive. It's the strategic capacity to move through your life and
mm,
make understanding um, and 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 um, and move through it with ease. So what we see with those folks is that their circuits are actually working the way they're supposed to. Their brain waves are working the way they're supposed to. Their amygdala is not overfiring, nor is their insula, but down deeper than even that is the cerebellum. And most people are not aware. Many years ago, we thought that the cerebellum was just for balance and proprioception, the ability
mm.
to know where we are in space. And now what we're understanding is that it has 80% of the brain's neurons are in there, which is a very
Wow.
small substructure. So that's interesting. And
Yeah.
also that it has everything to do with our sense of safety. And I would like to say our sense of placement in society, although I haven't seen a study come out on that yet.
Mm,
So we see a weakened cerebellum and an overfiring of the entire limbic system, and often a propensity towards addiction, whether that's workaholism or alcoholism, if the cerebellum is weak, because
wow.
it's giving all of the information to those other structures. The amygdala is not responsible for all of the pain and suffering that we're having in the world. It's actually getting
Mm,
its information from the cerebellum. And And also about the amygdala, there's two aspects to it, and it's as equally as not equally, it's actually not equally in number of cells or structure, but it is, I'll just say it's also assigned to joy, right? So amygdala is here to help us sort out our emotions and hopefully transmute from pain or fear into joy.
Mm,
So there's a lot to be understood inside of the brain, and ultimately someone cannot fake it because we can look at what's going on and we're like, yeah, you see this little red blotch right here?
mm,
This is, and then without, my colleague is the reader of the EEG at the level that he does. I help him to further explain and extrapolate what this might be meaning in their life and what the possibility is if we correct these things. But when we look at it, we can see, is this person worried about themselves? Are they overthinking about themselves, or are they overthinking and scanning the surroundings for survival?
yeah.
There's a difference in the brain and how that looks.
Mm,
Right?
mm,
Did they
yeah.
recover from their trauma? Maybe not if their alpha is suppressed. And it
Mm,
doesn't matter if they sit in alpha meditation or binaural beats. It doesn't come up so far as we can tell with those sorts of methods because it's the suppression of trauma is just really comprehensive, and that can lead to all sorts of difficulty for the rest of someone's life.
mm. Thank you. Fascinating. Yeah, I've interviewed Dr. Dawson Church on my podcast. He's done he did wrote the book Bliss Brain, one of his last books, and I've kind of had a look into like the structure of the brain, and obviously I think it's Dr. Bethel van der Kolk talks about that a bit as well. One of the key things which I see with my clients is a lot of addiction coming
Hmm.
out of,
Hmm.
boarding schools. And I spoke to a specialist on addiction called Mark Sunderland, and he pointed out that the two most overrepresented segments of society in addiction work are people who've been adopted and those who've
Yeah,
been sent to boarding school.
exactly. Wow, I didn't know that number, and I would concur just based on my findings in the last 23 years. Those are
Mm,
huge setups for
mm.
addiction. And it could be substance, but it could also be true deep workaholism. I think that we all
Oh,
have to work an edge there with not getting into the too much work if we're really
yeah,
passionate
yeah,
about what we do.
yeah.
But I think that definitely a lot of alcohol, alcohol temporarily brings alpha up in the brain. It doesn't bring it
Mm,
up in a way that's cohesive or um, the way that it's meant to, but it brings it up. And that creates relief for people. A lot of people who have had trauma that they have not recovered from, it shows in their brain. And part of the way that it shows is the alpha is suppressed. And when alpha is suppressed, we're not getting uh, alpha is very minimal with our eyes open, but it's supposed to come up in an occasional peak. And
mm,
that peak
mm.
works a little bit like a page refresh, right?
Ah,
So we need that in order to be able to do the next thing, to be able to move
mm,
into that next segment of our day, to be able to process and integrate what we've, already experienced in the day. So for people who don't have that proper alpha, they're struggling all through their day. And it can make them be then
mm,
craving alcohol, but it's different than, maybe an addiction center of the brain being lit up. It's truly just that they want their alpha to come up.
mm,
It doesn't come up in a way that's perfect and healthy, but at least they get some relief, and
mm,
it can feel like they feel their body again is another
mm,
part of it. They feel like they can feel more relaxed.
mm,
You hear that from folks. And that
mm,
could be correlated to the alpha being temporarily raised up in the ways that it is. And of course, alcohol is a really bad long-term neurological strategy and probably life strategy. There's the recent studies that have come out is like, hey, the right amount of alcohol is essentially none, unfortunately,
right.
for those that like to imbibe,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
because it's not good for the brain. And if it's not good for the
Mm,
brain, it doesn't matter. All the studies about the heart maybe are even refuted. But top level of order is the brain. But I understand, and I don't pass judgment on folks that are that have that craving. at all because I can understand it. Like if we can just tune up the brain, if we can have the alpha naturally recur, a lot of those folks are not genuinely addicted in that way. They're just looking for that temporary relief.
Mm. So how do we start to balance out the alpha? How do we start to have a more coherent brain? And I presume that's linked in with having a more coherent heart. I mean, one of the things I've noticed with a lot of, and I had on my podcast a number of years ago, Professor Joy Chavarin. She calls the ABCD of boarding school syndrome. The D is the dissociation. So it's like the splitting off from feelings, the shutting down of the heart.
Yeah.
What have you found how do we bring coherence back into the brain, into the heart? What are some practices or ways that you help others to do that? Please, Amy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak to a variety of different things here, some of which are going to be for free and some of which are going to be accessible to just, for fees or, pieces of equipment and things like that that people can do at home. I think that the first thing to recognize is that even for those that have true alpha suppression, meditation can feel very frustrating because they
Mm,
don't actually have the capacity to turn off the chatter.
mm,
And I'm not saying to not do it or to discourage, but just to name that out loud. So for many folks, meditation can feel like a frustration. If it doesn't feel like a frustration, I highly recommend that you do it. And
mm,
even if it does feel like you can't turn off the chatter, maybe just recognize that it's worthwhile to stare out the window with your eyes open onto some beautiful scenery or to sit next to water. Water helps to naturally increase alpha. So that's why people have insights in the shower or the bath. And near a lake or a river or by the sea, it's really important that people be in nature to be able to help to restore their alpha. Nature will teach us if we spend enough time with her what it is to be in our body again.
mm,
Especially if we have direct contact with the earth. Um, that's a huge and powerful and free tool that people can engage in. So, meditation, time in nature, water. Then I would also say that there's a tool that is available for free as a download on my website, which I highly encourage for people to do. It has been life-changing for folks, and it includes getting people out of that cognitive loop because it works on neurobiological and energetic pathways to be able to create a sense of safety in the body in real time
mm,
and also a sense of being interconnected, not just as a thought construct, but as an actual. So people have often had massive breakthroughs. They're like, wow, that's the most powerful meditation I've ever had. And I'm a meditator of 10 years, or wow, that was the first time I ever turned off my brain. And they'll describe something which sounds kind of silly, but is amazing. Like, I feel like a bit of an amoeba. I don't know where my edges are anymore. And I have this very gooey kind of good feeling,
mm,
right? Which maybe they've associated with these substances or alcohol or whatever in the past, or maybe it's only been very transient. But to be
mm,
able to move into that state with this process, and it's a very gentle breath, it's a gentle awareness of the coccyx, the sacrum, and then the tailbone beneath that. So it looks quite simple, and it is. And once somebody learns it, so the recording that I've offered right now is maybe 20 minutes long. I may redo that in the future. But if you practice that with your eyes closed and with the recording, you learn a methodology that you can take with you, eyes open or eyes closed, and nobody knows you're doing it. Because
mm,
it's not like the huffing and puffing kind of breath, which is also can be very beneficial, by the way. Um, but it's very natural to include into our everyday reality. And I found it to be one of the most important and powerful tools for this deep level of survival safety that we're describing today.
mm.
So I want
And
everybody to know about it.
okay, thank you.
Please, please, everybody go and download that and share it with people that you think that it might resonate with because our foundational sense of safety is really everything, like we're describing here today. It frames our entire reality,
Mm,
our entire lives. So. All right, so how are we doing so far? So we've got, then I would also recommend breath work on a bigger scale if it's held in the right container. So
Mm.
not by ourselves necessarily, because a lot of powerful emotion can be brought forward.
Yes.
But, you know, the deeper huffing and puffing kind of breath work, it could be the old ancient Qigong styles, or it could be,
Mm.
you know, things that are popularized by some of the teachers of the day. Those can make massive neurological changes for people that can remain after the breathwork session, and really move people into a place where they've, let's say, they've shed off what it is that has them unsafe. Right, the
Mm.
emotion then leaves, so then the safety is what remains. That's really what we're doing in this, is we're removing the unsafety to find what's there. You know, another tool that I really love, and this one costs about 600 US dollars, is the Neurovisor.
Okay.
And that is it literally looks like a bit of like a hat or a visor that you put on.
Mm.
And then right in front of your eyes, there's a little panel of lights that blink. And there's a massive visual entrainment with those lights. And then there's also an auditory entrainment that goes along with it. And with a small app on your phone that's free, and a device that you can share with your whole family or your friends or your team, you can change your brain. I mean, what we've just run a few pilots here, but I would say that we're definitely seeing 1 to 2 standard deviations of change across the board for folks. So what that equates to is a massive state shift, a
Mm.
massive change in emotion and how our body is feeling and coming into our body. So I do recommend that as a general thing, although I cannot say that it's appropriate for all the listeners here, because that would be considered medical advice and I don't know you. And please read all the contraindications and make sure it's appropriate. But that's a
Mm.
very powerful tool. And we've seen just so many. I've deeply benefited personally from it as well. And I'll utilize that as a segue into meditation,
Mm.
so that I can just sit more, you know, even more deeply after with ease. But I also will use it as an afternoon reboot. They have got support in there for sleep. Us taking really good care of our body is a huge part of us feeling safe in our body,
Mm.
right? So getting good sleep and making sure that our nutrition and drinking lots of water and all of the things. But yeah, they've got a lot of different programs for different moods that we want to be in, different settings, you know, social settings. Coming back, I one of my personal favorites, if anybody ever does dive into this, is the feeling of me, and I think it's one that is massive. It works with the default mode network and
Okay.
helps us to come back to this baseline of who we are and really
Mm.
reside in our body in a safe way. So
Mm.
that's another tool. I'll pause there. I could talk for days on tools for safety, but those are some good ones.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. Nature. Yeah, I love nature. It's a practice I got into a number of years ago. I, I was a teacher for a number of years in schools and like forest school training. And so I got into this habit of going and sitting in my garden barefoot every morning, just
Oh,
looking at nature. And I've had some amazing things like a hare has come in, or one day a ferret. And because I sit still, they just come and potter around me and they don't know I'm there. And it's like, wow, they're really small. So having my feet barefoot on the earth is like, yeah, I generally put my shoes on if it's snowing, but
a
other
fair.
than that, other than that, I will be barefoot. Water, again, I've found water so healing over the years, and I can really resonate. I find that in summertime, if I can be stood on earth next to water, or the water is the earth is damp, if it's dry, it doesn't
That's
have the
right.
same connectivity,
That's
almost that
right.
chi. And
Hmm.
then obviously meditation. And I've often heard that with people. I remember when I taught meditation about 20 years ago in the corporate world, that people would struggle to go into meditation. If I taught them Qigong first,
Hmm.
then they could go into the meditation much easily. It took them out of that beta into alpha,
That's
and
right.
then they could segue more peacefully into their meditation. So
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I've not
Qigong
heard of it.
yoga is amazing for that too. Yoga's
Yeah.
intention is to yoke the spirit into the physical movement, right? And so
Mm.
once we've got ourselves into our bodies, then it's easier to sit in meditation, which is
Mm,
in my understanding, the true utilization of yoga is the postural practice then is to lend to a better sitting meditation after. But I don't think that that's what's taught most time now. It's you go to the little
no.
studio and take your class or whatever, and then nobody's
Yeah.
sitting after. The shavasana at the end, sometimes I want to say that too. Sometimes people really thrive with laying down meditation versus seated
Mm,
meditation. I find it's
mm,
much easier. I've
mm,
trained myself to stay right at that liminal state where I'm not
mm,
asleep, but I'm very, very deep. And it becomes easier because you don't have to support your body. I find I drop in when I'm seated, I drop in so deeply that I a little bit slump over, or I
yeah.
feel like something might distract me in that regard. So the full
Mm,
surrender of lying down, as the yogic style shows with that shavasana at the end, might be
yeah.
helpful for some folks.
Yeah. And thank you. What would you say is the importance of the physical body if we have dissociated, if we've suppressed our emotions? It's almost like we're not embodied anymore in our bodies.
Yeah.
What's the importance, and are there some practices that you found that help people to become more embodied?
Yeah, the importance would be that it's our body is designed to be our feedback mechanism. It's a
Mm,
sacred home, first off. It's not just a meat bag, if I could just clarify that point for everybody.
mm,
We're working inside of the hologram of sacred of the all that is, and so therefore we are sacred. Our bodies are sacred and a part
mm,
of the divine or God. And within that, our safety within it is our ability to be able to read deeper into situations and respond appropriately. So, intuition, our ability to track what's going on around us or to be able to predict what's coming, that is hugely run by our ability to track our body,
mm,
and again, intuition is one of those things that could be put into the woo quadrant of our lives, or or judgment, or it could be dismissed like, oh no, I'm not an intuitive person. Those are those kinds of people, and I'm not one of those, right?
mm,
I'm not an intuitive person. But intuition is a part of our birthright. And so even if we've had a rough start with adoption or boarding school or other kinds of trauma, um, and or for whatever reasons, we feel disconnected. Maybe we just chose to pray to the science god and be an intellectual and cut
mm,
all of that off for whatever reason in our life. We have the ability, it's a natural ability, and we can come back to it. It's how
mm,
we got here, if you think about it. Our ancestors were better at the intuitive knowing of how to live with the land.
mm,
Where were the animals to eat and or what to do with the crops once they became farmers or um, there's a storm coming, right? How did they do
mm,
that? They're listening to the wind. They're feeling things. They're knowing things that we've lost maybe our ability to do, but it can come back really easily and naturally inside of that environment. And the main anchor for all of that is safety and being in our body, because that's where even if we don't feel it and we just have a sense of knowing, even if we don't feel it in our body, but we have a picture that comes to us that represents something, an insight, no matter what, our body must be something that we're connected to in order
mm,
for for the mechanism of intuition to be at its peak. And the most intuitive people, I think, are the most resilient people in that regard, the most capable of pivoting before the other people maybe have seen what's coming in business. I think that
mm,
a lot of folks will say that they look at spreadsheets. I've been present for investors and M&As and mergers and acquisitions and all of the things. And I would say that the smartest people in business are the most intuitive, even if they don't think that they are,
100%. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They
Jim
could feel.
Collins talks
Mm,
about that in Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0, the importance of intuition. Most of us poo-poo it. It's like, oh, that's rubbish. But he's like the greatest leaders he knows in their decision making. Yes, they have data, but they combine that with intuition,
that's right.
you know?
That's right. And there's that science meets the spirituality or that the depth of life, right?
Yeah.
What it means to be human is not to be a robot.
No, no, no. And it reminds me a bit of what I've learned through Mantak Chia's work is this idea of the three dantians, and the intuition lives in that lower dantian. You've got the
That's
heart
right.
dantian and then you've got the upper dantian. We've just given all our energy to our heads, to the upper
That's
dantian.
right.
But we've got two other centers that we can connect to, our hearts. What are we feeling? What's our intuition saying?
Hmm.
And I find myself is it's almost like my intuition. It might take me a few days. I will sit with something and I'll get, oh, yep, that's a definite yes, or oh no, that's a definite no. Whereas the mind wants to know immediately. And it's like, just wait.
Right. If the mind could just pause its chatter for a moment and for us to be able to feel what's happening in our body. There's
Mm,
often for so many of us a tightening or a relaxation when we hear someone's name or when we feel into an opportunity or when we, you know, something is presented to us, we have that immediate response. Just like we
mm,
might have the hairs on the back of our neck stand up if someone's staring at us aggressively, we can't see them with our
mm,
eyes, but we can feel it, right?
mm.
And that felt experience is it really tells you something. You know, if that person had made your hair stand up on the back of your neck and then they come up to you smiling, it's important to take in all of the signals, right? And just really pay attention to what's going on. And they could look like they have the best business deal in the world, but if there's something twinging in your gut that says, something's not right here, dig in deeper and consider stepping away because likely that's something inside of you that's guiding you past what the intellect could possibly know.
That's fascinating. And Stephen Porges in the polyvagal theory, he talks about this idea. And I've heard this from Nick Duffel, who I've interviewed a few times, who's written Wounded Leaders and work around boarding school. He says that one of the things we struggle with is to interpret facial signals
Hmm.
because our hearts are shut down. So we might get someone come up to us and we're like, you could see this with David Cameron and Boris Johnson in Europe. They weren't able to create relationships or read people.
That's right.
And therefore, it's such an important thing in business and in life to
It
be
is.
able to go, this is wrong, this deal doesn't feel right.
Exactly. So here we go away from the squishy parts of let's be co-regulating and beautiful leaders who are, have empathy and wisdom. If that sounds too squishy, it's like also just the preservation of self, right? Because you
Mm,
can sense where danger is, because danger can come in all forms. Could be a lovely person, a great idea, but the business is going to drop out because of XYZ in the market. If you can
mm,
know that inside of your gut in advance, isn't that a nice thing? Even if you don't know why. We don't always have to
mm,
know why. We can just know that something is a yes or a no at a deeper level and then follow that thread. I
mm.
love it that you mentioned Porges, and I don't know if maybe all the listeners know about the polyvagal theory that he put together. That's another thing that we offer. So we have really advanced in-person and remote neurological, energetic leadership, um, deeply spiritual programs that integrate everything that I'm talking about here and much more. Like this is only maybe a couple of leaves of the thing to go back to the analogy, right? But this is a bit of a glance in. But one of the things that we do offer is, in a remote format, is something that works in the polyvagal theory as put out by Porges, and it's actually a program that he developed. It's a listening program that's about 5 hours long, and what happens is that it tones the musculature of the middle ear, and it
Wow.
actually repatterns how the vagus nerve is firing. And so we've had massive, massive shifts in co-regulation for folks, their ability, like you were saying, to perceive the reality around them accurately, because we
Mm,
don't want to just pretend that everything is safe. And we don't want to be in constant fight or flight and misreading signs, because we can project upon this new person that we've met or this new opportunity what happened to us in boarding school in the seventh grade
mm,
subconsciously for the rest of our lives, right?
mm,
Or whatever it is that we're working with. And sometimes what it is that is subconscious can be even more impactful than what it is that we realize about ourselves, which is just a piece of the universe of what's actually driving things, right? So,
mm,
inside of this program, it can be administered remotely, which is amazing. So, we can help people
mm,
all over the world to become really, really safe and know how to drop into their body in a different way. And
mm,
also help them to know how to accurately perceive signals from around them and know
mm,
how to better relate to themselves and to other people around them and really reshape their reality. So it's a very potent and simple step that somebody can take if that's another piece of resonance. Um,
Mm.
but I think that there's a lot of stuff out there, like humming for vagus nerve, for instance, can get it's a bit of a band-aid, right? But
Okay.
this is a very deep fix. Like this is a
Mm.
process. You can't just sit down and listen to 5 hours. It's maybe 15, maybe 30 minutes at a time with integration after. It's potent. So just for people to know that these things exist, I think is so important.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I really see is that people will kind of have this I'm going along to get along mentality,
Mm.
and nothing's really going to help. I'll just take in another podcast, or I'll read another theory, or I'll listen to another book or whatever it is, but they're not necessarily taking the opportunity to make change because they either
Mm.
don't believe it applies to them or whatever. There's a bunch of reasons why. But I think that for
Mm.
people to really understand that, take anything that you've heard here and apply it, take anything that
Mm.
resonates and apply it, and continue to do that because we all have the capacity to heal, even the deepest of traumas.
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, some of these things are hard to overcome, but that's okay. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of my favorite phrases. I remember that learning that in the monastery. Going, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I've started the
Mhm.
first step. I'm only on step two, but I haven't got far. But
Wherever we all are, right? But it's just that, if we apply strategically the world framing, and then we have the right tools inside of that and the right support inside of it, it is miraculous what can happen.
mm,
Right.
yeah.
And so if we believe that we're always going to be messed up, this is also the 1960s psychotherapeutic maybe imprint that we're still working inside of. This is the subconscious belief structure. I'm sort of messed up. I don't want anybody to know that I'm messed up. And if I
Mhm.
work really hard, I'll be marginally, like slightly less, incrementally less messed up.
Mhm.
So here I am, and this is my lot in life. And the answer
Mhm.
to that is no.
No, no, definitely. And I think for me, that's one of the things I see with uh, the- my clients, but also leaders and people who've been to boarding school is one, it's complex, and a lot of them feel like, well, there's nothing I can really do. And actually, what you're sharing and my work is like you can heal, you can get better. It's like to
Absolutely.
believe that and to know that that's true. And so, yeah. So,
And to receive the support of it, right? The support
mm,
of this conversation, this moment in time, the support of
mm,
the people that we know in our lives, our friends and our family, if they know how to provide that kind of support, but also any kinds of these deeper programs. One of the things that I love about conversation with you is the amount that you've studied,
mm,
the in a true way, not just read, but really I feel like digested, right? Not just listened
mm,
to, but have really learned from. And I
mm,
think that that really stands out because there's a lot of people who will create a superficial understanding of something, and I can feel the depth of contemplation and reflection in you. And I feel like that creates a really beautiful place for somebody to rest inside of, right? Like if inside of this conversation, and also just inside of whatever services and things that you've offered or may offer in the past or currently doing.
thank you,
Um,
Amy.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for cultivating your wisdom. It's making a difference.
Thank you, and bless you. I think being with my wife for nearly 20 years, being with that feminine wisdom was transformational for me. Yes, the monastery, I studied shamanism for a number of years, but
Mm,
being with the feminine and just holding, nurturing
mm.
has been, there's such wisdom in it. So thank you for your kind words, and thank you for coming and speaking today. I realize we're coming up to an hour now. As we start to wrap up, is there one final thing that you would love to share with my audience that maybe you haven't spoken about yet and it
Mm.
feels important to hear?
I feel like it's just maybe the continuation of what we were speaking to a moment ago, that we are timeless souls on an endless journey.
Mm,
that we are walking miracles, right? If you think about our heart is beating and all of the neurochemistry is happening and all of the biology is happening, and we are living here because of our ancestors. And there's a through line for us, right? We also will have our ancestors that look back to us. And for us to be recognizing that there's more that we don't know than what we do know, just like there's more black spaces in the sky than there are stars.
mm,
It's a different frame. And that we can feel
mm,
safe inside of the not knowing because we can know the universals. And one of
mm,
those universals is that we are capable of a miracle in every moment.
mm,
Right?
I love that. It reminds me of Einstein when he says the most important question you should ask yourself is whether this is a friendly universe or not.
Oh, I love that one. I love
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same as like to believe in miracles. And when we do, it's like anything is possible. And I really feel humanity, we're moving into that space where anything is possible now.
Hmm.
So we just got to move through this crunchy time.
That's right. And I think, it is a crunchy time, and I think that within that, the conversation about miracles, I'm just remembering as we're speaking this, maybe in my second or third year of practice. So I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine, is what I have my doctorate in. And
Mhm,
but people were coming to me for, end of life stuff. Just like my very first year of practice, especially 23 years ago, we had the hardest of the most difficult medical cases come to us because
mhm,
there was no other option, right? And so it's a difficult situation. It's not like we were, necessarily getting the easy ones back then, or I wasn't. And so what I realized is that we have the capacity for a miracle. And at some point, maybe about 2 years in, I had about a 1 year waiting list for a new client, a new patient.
mhm,
And a 1 year, as I was looking at that 1 year waiting list and how did I end up with that, I would say that it's because I really genuinely believed and helped to co-create miracles. But we're
mhm,
not going to find miracles unless we're looking for them. And they aren't just going to
mhm,
happen to us unless we're reaching out for them, right?
mhm,
So how can we be? How do we remember? And how do we become that perfect recipient for the next, not just serendipity, but miracle? How do we
mhm.
remember that we can be wiped clean in the best of ways so that we remember who we actually are, right?
Yeah,
Remove the noise and the real self comes forward.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. You are a timeless soul on an endless journey. It almost sounds something that Lao Tzu would have said. It's like, I really like that. Lao
Thank
Ji Jing, verse 64 or something like that.
you.
But beautiful. Well,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. And it's been a real, so fascinating. I know I could probably talk for another few hours and weave different webs. And thank you so much for your work. And how do people find more about your work and download the meditations?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is holonexperience.com, HOLON
Dot com.
experience.com. And
Great.
the download is available immediately as soon as you get there. And that's probably still the biggest anchor. I would recommend that anybody that this this message is resonating with, you can just reach out. You can either send in an application or just fill out a contact form. And the team and I can figure out what is appropriate. We've got a bunch of offerings, some of which are so emergent that they're not even yet on the website. And we're creating different, we've got some on-site, very, very, very elite, best in neuroscience, best hardware, software, and methodology in the world, but it's very expensive, right? And I recognize that. And I also know that for some folks, that's exactly the right thing and what they need. But I know for some folks, the download, the free download, and some of the other tools, we also have lesser expensive programs that are guided by people in real time, like the Polyvagal Stephen
Mm,
Porges listening program is guided. So lots of different options, and it's a whole universe inside of the Holon experience. So I invite people into the ecosystem of Holon, and
mm,
you know, and stay tuned because we're always coming out with new opportunities for those miraculous transformations.
mm. Well, bless you for your work. It's very inspiring. And like I say to my guests, if I can support in any way, please do let me know.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you for this inspiring conversation. I
Mm,
really can feel you. I appreciate you.
pleasure. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.